Greetings once again, friends. My name is Peter, and welcome back to Retro Unscripted. As always, I thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule to check out my work, and I hope that you'll really like this episode, which is episode number 32. Going back to the days BI, or before internet, if you were stuck in a game, if you were playing a game and you didn't know how to get past a particular section, if there was a boss character that was giving you fits and you didn't know how to beat it, if there was a dungeon that you kept getting lost in, there wasn't internet around for you to jump on and get immediate answers. Back in those days, you had to look to print media to help you out. For example, although my cartridge is a little bit dirty, I got this one for free, but this is Tiny Toon Adventures Buster Bust Loose for the SNES or Super Nintendo. This game is generally straightforward, but there are certain parts of the game that are really difficult. But fear not if you struggled with this game and didn't know how to advance, because Nintendo Power was ready for you. This is Tiny Toon Adventures Buster Bust Loose. This is issue number 46 of the magazine, and inside of the magazine there is a full spread on Tiny Toon Adventures Buster Bust Loose with maps of all of the areas of the game. In fact, the last stage of the game, which is 6, which is a space opera, the map actually folds out. This is actually the poster in the magazine, but you can actually see the entire layout of the game. So I thought that was pretty neat. That's why I haven't taken the poster out, by the way, to put up on my wall, because I actually do play Tiny Toons, and the map does help. So this was one way if you kind of got stuck. And granted, you wanted to be a subscriber to Nintendo Power back then anyway, because, well, let's face it, the magazine is awesome. But aside from magazines, there were also strategy guides that you could get that could help you out in a very difficult situation. Now, the less obvious, this is Ace Combat 2, which is one of my favorite games in the series. Now, you can probably play all the way through this on your own with no help, but for players who were new to the series who hadn't played the first game, a strategy guide might have been a big help. Enter GameFan and their official Ace Combat 2 strategy guide. And this is the official guide, by the way. It says so right here. Official Ace Combat 2 strategy guide. This is really cool. I don't like some of the fonts that they use, but the very basics, or the basics that the guide uses as far as the map layout, which is down here, is a big help. In addition, in the back of the issue, they give you some goodies that you can shoot for, which are here, and I like the Ace Combat logo here. So this wasn't one of the guides that you needed to have, but I found this for $2 and I've kept it because I'm such a big Ace Combat fan. So that's the Ace Combat 2 guide. Whee! Let's get more complicated. RPGs are where strategy guides were almost essential back then, especially if you weren't a hardcore role-playing game player, and you tended to get lost in dungeons. One example is Chrono Cross, which is this guy right here. This is my original copy from the year 2000. This game, I have to admit, I have not played for very long, and the reason for that, and completely off topic, this came out the same day that Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 came out, and well, Tony Hawk won that battle. I played this game probably for an hour or two, but I never really went back to it. I've made attempts here and there to go back and start fresh, but I just haven't had the time. But when I got this game, I thought it was imperative to get the strategy guide. And that is this guy right here. And as you can see from the really shiny, cool cover, that's really neat. That stands out, and one of the reasons why I kept this guide for years. Now, inside of this guide, there's a list of player characters. There's some basic combat tips, some explanations of some of the elements and items, and then there's a full walkthrough of the game, which is important if you just want to get through it and don't want to find out for yourself, or if there are parts in the game that are just really pissing you off and you want to get through them without continuing to go through the trial and error or continuing to lose. So this particular guide comes in very handy. Do you need it now? No, but back then when this game came out, even though the internet was around, it was still pretty much in its infancy, so this guide was a big help. Now, this particular guide and game combination is one of my favorites. This is the Final Fantasy Chronicles set that has Final Fantasy IV and Chrono Trigger. Now, I know what you're going to say if you're a purist. Chrono Trigger has too much loading time. Final Fantasy IV has too much loading time, and there are differences here and there. I'm a big fan of both games, especially Final Fantasy IV, so for me to have more versions of the game to play, especially since Final Fantasy IV, this version was harder than the Super Nintendo release that we had here in the US, it was a no-brainer. I had to have it. Now, the strategy guide for Final Fantasy Chronicles is actually pretty cool because it covers both games but divides the guide down the middle. So this is the Final Fantasy IV side, and then you have to flip it over like this, and you get the Chrono Trigger side. Again, the internet was around then, and there were guides that were beginning to be put together, but this guide had everything that you needed at your fingertips in paper form, and made the game very easy to play, especially for novices. So that's the Final Fantasy Chronicles guide. Now, I'd like to share with you one of the worst strategy guides in history, and it's not the writer's fault. This is Final Fantasy IX, highly regarded as the game that kind of took the series back to its roots after Final Fantasy VIII was so divisive. Ugh. Final Fantasy VIII. Anyway, so this game had a strategy guide, and it looks like this. Now, the catch is, see this here? Enhanced by PlayOnline.com? That was the big kicker, because every time in this book that you're looking up something, and I'll try and show you on camera here, like right here, it says, go to PlayOnline.com to find out more, and that was all it was. Go to PlayOnline.com. Go to PlayOnline.com. So it was basically, it was a go-together with the internet at the time, which was okay then, but now that PlayOnline.com is gone, this strategy guide is all but worthless. So, Final Fantasy IX. Over there. Okay, speaking of games and strategy guides that people didn't like very much, this here is Final Fantasy X-2. This is not my original copy. This is a replacement copy that I got back in 2011 when I started seriously collecting for the PS2. But I, believe it or not, although I got rid of the game and I replaced it, I never got rid of the strategy guide. That is this guy right here, this behemoth right here. Now, this Final Fantasy X-2 strategy guide, I should say, comes not only with the guide itself, but also with an art book. And I'll try and show you on camera here. So this is the art book over here. And I'll kind of open it out so you can see it. And then over here is the actual 300-plus page strategy guide. I was just a sucker for this kind of stuff back then. It felt like getting the whole set. If you only bought the game, at least to me, it felt like you were missing something. So actually having the strategy guide just was kind of cool. It made sense. It was something that I did. Have I used the strategy guide? No. Have I played Final Fantasy X-2? Probably half hour. And I didn't like the premise back then. I have told myself I'm going to go back to this whenever I get time. Of course, I turn 43 in a couple of months, and my time is starting to run short on this planet, but hopefully I will get a chance to play this and check out the guide. And we'll put that right there. Yes. Now, I don't have the case for this game. This is Lord of the Rings, The Third Age. This basically is a Lord of the Rings role-playing game that plays a lot like Final Fantasy X. Some people didn't like it. I think it's a fantastic idea, and I've enjoyed what I've played of this so far. Now, I got the guide for the game when it was being clearanced out for just a penny. And here's what the guide looks like. It's a Prima guide. It's very basic. But the thing that I thought was cool about this guide, and I haven't taken these out, I'll try and open it so you can see, is there are trading cards in here. And the trading cards you can actually fold out and you can make a set of cards. And they have both the player characters and also the characters from Middle Earth that you can check out their attacks and stats and pictures. So I thought that was pretty neat. The game is pretty straightforward. So do you really need a strategy guide to play the Third Age? Probably not. Some of you could probably answer that question better than I can. But getting this guide for a penny and seeing the cards in there, I thought that was a pretty cool get. And of course, whenever you're playing a role-playing game, just having a guide in front of you rather than having to chase down the internet or look on your phone every now and again can be a big help. So that's Lord of the Rings: The Third Age. I recommend it, by the way. If you see it for the PS2 or the Xbox or even the GameCube, grab it. It's pretty good. And then comes Metal Gear Solid. Really my big game of Christmas 1998. And I've said in past videos for Retro Unscripted that I actually played through this game while working at FuncoLand. Myself and my manager, Justin, actually tag teamed in order to be able to beat the game, and the game is fantastic. Years later, I actually wound up getting the strategy guide for it, and this is not the official guide. Oh, I'm sorry, it is. This is the only authorized Metal Gear Solid strategy guide. It comes from Millennium Publishing. And in here, kind of like with the Game Fan guide, they have maps, they have enemy profiles, and this is really great for a walkthrough. Not to mention, there's something called the Metal Gear Ultimate file, which is right here, which kind of gives you the secrets or spoilers if you really want to know when you're having a difficult time playing. Of course, I opened it. I won't show you what's in here because that's not good. But I thought that was pretty neat. Also, in the back of the guide, there's some artwork, which I thought was great. And if I could blow some of this stuff up to put on my wall, I probably would. But that's the Metal Gear Solid guide. There's also one for Metal Gear Solid VR missions. I didn't pull it out for this particular video. But that comes in handy especially for the Snake Tales and for the extra missions in the game that aren't your very basic VR run-throughs that you probably remember some of them from the original Metal Gear Solid. So, strategy guides, I've kind of run through a brief history based on what I have in my library. Starting way back with Nintendo Power before internet, and then as the internet kind of grew into being, we had strategy guides for Final Fantasy IV and for Chrono Trigger. And then, of course, with Final Fantasy IX, we saw that direct link to the internet where you could actually go to playonline.com, and it was almost a symbiotic kind of relationship to games that you could get the strategy guide for completion's sake, such as Final Fantasy X-2, or you could get a guide such as Lord of the Rings: The Third Age, which has some extra cool stuff in it just to have for fans of the game or the series. And my view on strategy guides really, thankfully they're still around. I tend to default to strategy guides more than the internet myself, only because I can have the book open, I can look down and get the information right there, rather than digging out my phone or digging out my tablet, typing in a web address and sifting through the walkthrough or the how-to guide in order to find what I'm looking for. I can kind of follow along as I go. I can put pictures and maps together with the written tips and suggestions to help me get through some pretty tough areas of each game. I hold on to my strategy guides more for symbolic reasons now than anything else. I only have probably about 30 strategy guides left, and my library spans well over 1,000 games, so it's a very small percentage. But to me, typifies a period of time where we didn't always have to rely on technology to get us through some pretty difficult spots. As long as you had a guide with you, you spent the extra money, no challenge was unbeatable and no task was impossible. As always, I thank you very much for watching this episode of Retro Unscripted. I hope that you enjoyed it in my quick trip through my strategy guides. What are your thoughts on strategy guides? Those of you who are collecting, do you have a library of guides that you use or that you have? And if so, what are some of the more interesting ones that you have? I'd love to hear about them. Leave them in the comments below. As always, I love hearing from you. Until the next episode of Retro Unscripted, which I promise will not take another month. My name is Peter, and I thank you very much for watching. Until the next time, my friends, take care.